As we close in on the BCS national title game, it's a chance for some teams to look back and say, "Wahapa." Welcome into the Sporting News Studios as we talk college football on First and 10 with our Sporting News college football writer Matt Hayes, brought to you as always by our friends at Allstate. And Matt, before we do look ahead to the national title game, let's look back and look at USC, a team rated #1 in the AP preseason poll. They end the season by losing, 5 out of their last 6 and falling in the Sun Bowl to Georgia Tech. So I ask you, what happened to the Trojans?
I think it was a number of things. The defense obviously didn't play as well as they should have or could have. I think they struggled on offense, despite the fact that they had a lot of elite skill players. But the reality is, this is Lane Kiffin's team. And Tom, Lane Kiffin has to realize that he needs to be the coach. He needs to be the CEO. He needs to let his assistants and his offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator do their job. Right now, he's the guy that's calling plays. He's the quote-unquote offensive coordinator, even though he doesn't have that title. His head's always buried in that play chart of his. He's not watching things. He's always looking for the next play. He's got to walk that sideline, and he's got to realize what's going on with his team. He's got to have the pulse of his team. His quarterback, Max Wittick, was walking on that sidelines, Tom, alone against Georgia Tech while he was imploding on the field. Lane Kiffin has to go over there and sit down with him and talk with him. He's got to get the other assistants to rally around that kid. He's got to get the players to rally around the kid. You know, you're in a situation right there where you can't let a guy like Max Wittick, who at that point is the key to your team because he's playing the most important position on the field, you can't let him just sit there and drown in that situation. And Lane has to realize that coaching is a lot more than just calling plays.
Is this a case, of a guy, we talk in the NFL all the time about a guy who's a great coordinator, and I think of Norv Turner, but isn't cut out to be a head coach. What's your take on Kiffin in that regard?
It's interesting, Tom, because he's got a dynamic personality. He's the kind of guy that players like, so I think he could do it. I think he could be that kind of coach, but he's just so engrossed with calling plays. He's so engrossed with the way they play offensively. He's come down to basically what he was his first tenure at USC when he was the offensive coordinator and recruiting coordinator under Pete Carroll. That's what he does best. He calls plays and he recruits kids. And I think he has to learn that, now is the time for me to take the next step. I have to become a CEO. And if that means going to talk to some of the most successful guys, be it Nick Saban, be it Mac Brown, guys that have done it year after year, then he needs to go do that. Because right now, he looks lost there. He had his jacket over his head. He had sunglasses on. His head was buried into his play call chart during that game when they were just getting destroyed on both sides of the ball. So, he has to become a head coach now.
Yeah, I got you. Now, over in the state of Pennsylvania, we've got a lawsuit now, the state suing the NCAA for the sanctions that the NCAA imposed on Penn State University. What's your take on it?
Well, there's a couple takes. Number one is what took so long for someone, be it the state of Pennsylvania or Penn State or someone, to try and reverse what has happened with the NCAA, the huge step that they took, or I should say that Mark Emmert took basically on his own. And I think number two, a lot of this really, Tom, could help down the line if they somehow get some of the sanctions reversed or some of them turned away, because Bill O'Brien is certainly an attractive coach right now to the NFL. And if they can get to a point where there's a possibility that some of these things could go away, I think that could go a long way in helping him stay there at Penn State. It's not like the NCAA has this success in court over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And you can look at a lot of things, all the way from the restricted earnings coaches where they lost millions upon millions of dollars in that lawsuit. I always go back to the classic Rick Neuheisel case when he was a coach at Washington, when the NCAA compliance director at Washington told him he could do something, specifically told him he could do something, and then the NCAA later said he couldn't. And then he was fired for that eventually. And then, of course, Rick eventually won the lawsuit against the NCAA. So considering the history of the NCAA, nothing would surprise me in this situation.
All right, now speaking of surprises, we're all looking ahead to this national title game. We got a couple more games to go here before we get to it, but what have the early bowl games told us that we can maybe apply to some of these games coming up, and specifically the national title game?
Tom, I really believe that the teams that are excited and want to be there, and are invested in it, are the teams that win. You look at the Holiday Bowl. Baylor was geeked to be there. UCLA was disappointed, wasn't playing the Rose Bowl. Baylor won by 23. Northwestern was excited and ready to end their long bowl losing streak. And Mississippi State was drained after an awful November, and the Wildcats won by 2 touchdowns. Clemson beat LSU team that basically, Tom, wanted to play for the national championship and lost 2 tough games. And I really believe it bodes well for Notre Dame, because Notre Dame, is in a situation right now where everyone thinks Alabama's winning this game. No one's giving Notre Dame a chance. So why not use that as motivation, as a little emotion to further feed what they've got going. They're a very good team. They play very good on defense. If Everett Golson plays smart and doesn't turn the ball over, there's no doubt they can be in this game in the fourth quarter. And again, I'm not saying that Alabama doesn't want to be there, but Alabama certainly has been in this spot, over the last 2, 3, 4 years. So it's kind of like old hat to them. This is all a new thing now for Notre Dame. This could be something that Notre Dame can build on.
There you go. All right, well, listen, I know you've been sick, and you got to get ready for the national title game, so I'll let you go, Matt, and we'll catch up with you next week.
Okay, Tom.